Hello, everyone. It's another Friday. I'm Jeannie Walters. You're here. It's another Experience Investigators Ask Me Anything session. Today, we're going to be talking about how to address customer-centric culture barriers in your organization. As always, I'm excited to see all of you here. We also have Sean from our team. Sean, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jeannie. Good to have you back in your home office.
Thank you. Yes, I've been traveling a bit.
You have been traveling, so glad that we're all here together.
I am too. I am too. And I'm doing more traveling. So I'll be heading to London. So for those of us in the
Okay.
UK, I hope that I have a chance to say hi.
Yeah.
But how are things in Ohio today, Sean?
Today is Casual Friday for me,
Excellent.
so I cashed it up today, and I've got I've weather's good, and I've got a daughter who's about to graduate high school, so I'm
So
excited to.
exciting.
Yeah, that's exciting doing the commencement activities. So
Awesome.
busy on the homestead here in Ohio.
And I bet a lot of people can relate to that. This is that time of year when
Right.
everything's wrapping up. Yes, so that's very exciting. Well, congratulations to
Thank
your daughter
thank you.
and to you. I think parents deserve a little credit as well.
Well, let's see how she does in her next phase, and then I'll give her
Then
more credit.
then we'll do the
And I'll,
scoreboard. Yeah.
then I'll score it.
Well,
Uh,
for those of you joining us, please let us know where you're joining us from, what it's like. If you have graduations or other activities happening, that's always exciting too. So
Absolutely.
let's jump in. We've got a lot to cover today. So, Sean, you'll be back when we have questions.
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, today we're talking about customer-centric cultures. And the reason that we're talking about this today is because it's one of those things that comes up a lot when we talk about customer experience. People say, well, we have a customer-centric culture or we want to have one, but we don't always define that. So we're going to dig into that today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jeannie Walters. I have been in customer experience for more than 20 years. Started this company in 2009, where we advise organizational leadership on how to create a mindset, strategy, and discipline around customer experience. And I also have a podcast and this and everything else. So lots of resources for you at experienceinvestigators.com. So, when we talk about customer centric culture and building a customer centric culture, what we're really talking about is building something that you both have to nurture and define and make sure that everybody is aligned on what that means. So, when I talk to leaders about this, sometimes I say, what does that mean to you? And in one conversation I had, a leader very confidently went up to the whiteboard and drew this and said, this is what it means. The customer is at the center of everything we do. And I said, that's fantastic. I love the visual. What does that really mean? And he said it again. Well, it means that we are putting the customer at the center of everything we do. And I said, okay, so how does that show up? Do we include customers in developing products? Do we make sure we're co-creating with them? Do we check in with them? Do we evaluate employees based on how customer centric they are? How connected are you to what's actually happening? And that's where people get stumped. And I'm here to say, first of all, it's not your fault. It's the way organizations are structured, it's the way systems have been developed, all of those things. So, when we talk about making sure that we have customer centricity as part of our values or part of how we're running the organization, we have to put some discipline behind that, some real systems and processes, making sure that all the people involved actually understand what that means. So I'm going to ask you, have you actually adopted a similar motto or have you heard this in your organizations? A lot of times it's phrased in something like this. Our values include putting the customer in the center of everything we do, or sometimes it's seen as a guiding principle. We are a customer-centric organization. So I'm here to say, first of all, great if that's what you're doing, if that's how you're talking. But we want to take that beyond the words. We want to make sure that we're not just talking about this as an idea or an ideal. We're talking about this as a behavior, as an accountability, as an action. So, first of all, let's back up a little bit and talk about what is culture. When we talk about culture, sometimes we assume we're all talking about the same thing. But really, this is a complex thing. When we're talking about organizational culture, it's really dynamic. It changes, it evolves, it grows with you. And it really does have a significant impact on the success or the failure of an organization. We've heard of plenty of organizations who started out really strong with culture and then something happens. Sometimes power can corrupt leaders. That can make a big shift in the culture. Sometimes they bring in the wrong leadership. Sometimes all sorts of different things happen. So, when we're talking about this, we want to make sure that we are really understanding that culture is this complex system and it ties together the beliefs, values, assumptions, norms, and ways of interacting. That's really what your culture is all about. So let's make this more than just a wish or an idea. So, first of all, let's talk about the barriers here. One of the barriers to customer centric cultures is that leaders don't really understand the front line and other roles. We'll talk about that. Another barrier here, leaders rely on the excuse of business is still business and essentially use that as a reason not to care and not to put the customer at the center of everything they do. And then the other part here is leaders think one dedicated CX leader means they have a customer centric culture. They can check it off the list, right? This first barrier, and you'll notice I say leaders, 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 because leaders do have to really guide the culture. We have to do this by example, by accountability, by process, all of those things. So when we talk about not understanding the front line and other roles, this really is about culture comes from the top. When I start any program, not any program, but a lot of programs that I do with organizational leaders, one of the first things I do is ask them to tell me about their last interaction with a customer. And I can't tell you how many times people get really nervous. They start looking around the room, they shift in their chair because they realize they can't remember the last time they interacted directly with a customer. That's what happens as people get higher up in the organizational chart. We get further and further away from customers, ironically. So, when we ask people to really understand what it means to put the customer at the center, sometimes they literally don't have that view. They can't use that perspective because they're not really connected to it in the work that they do. So, this starts at the top, but ask yourself before you announce something like we're going to be customer centric, ask yourself as any leader throughout the organization, have you had an interaction with the customer in the last 30, 60, 90 days? And if the answer is no, we have to look for ways to connect. We have to look for ways to make sure that even if we're not interacting completely directly, we're spending time paying attention to things like the recordings from the contact center, from observational work, what's actually happening in the moment. You know, one of the companies that is known for this is Apple. They actually have designers who go into Apple stores and just watch. How are people interacting with our products? What are the questions they're asking? How can we interact with them and ask questions directly? So make sure that we are finding opportunities to really connect with customers on a daily basis. This is one of the things that drives me crazy too. Leaders say, well, business is still business. Paint a vision for, if we don't paint that vision for what this really means, then what happens is they say, well, we've got to cut expenses. We've got to do this. We have to make a profit. And they talk about it as if customer experience and being customer centric won't drive those organizational and business outcomes. And I'm here to tell you that they will. They absolutely will. So we need to paint the vision for how these efforts will pay off beyond just being nice to customers. So when we talk about having a customer centric culture, we need to understand that we are talking way beyond just saying be nice to customers, put them at the center. Because if we only say that, the minute there's a challenge, the minute that we have opportunities in business to cut those costs, or we see the forecast and we decide that maybe we don't need that whole team, we need to make that connection between how customer centricity actually moves the business forward. And if we talk about business as if it's separated from customers, we are losing. We are completely losing the thread of what is happening. Leaders think that one dedicated CX leader, and I'm sure some of you out there can relate to this, because when we talk about org charts, a lot of times people say, oh, we are customer centric. We have a chief customer officer. And I say, that's fantastic. What's their role? And they say, well, they report on customer feedback. They don't have a team, they don't have a budget, but they're in charge of customer experience. That is, first of all, not fair, frankly, to that leader. But then we also want to make sure we're realistic about this. What is it going to take to be customer centric? What processes do we need? What technology? What tools? We have to make sure we're evolving and growing based on employees and their actions, not just making sure that we have that one title on the org chart. That's a barrier to what we're trying to do here. So, what are the ways we can do this? Well, number one, we need to define what we mean when we talk about having a customer centric culture. You all know that I'm very passionate about making sure that we are defining what we mean around customer experience. This is part of it. If we're talking about being customer centric and putting the customer at everything we do, then let's make sure that we are actually defining that for everybody in the organization. We want to stay close to the actual customer no matter what. This is so important. We also want to evaluate if we're living up to this cultural idea. So, what we mean by that is that if we have a definition of what it really means to be customer centric, that means we're putting that into our internal processes. That means that we're telling the product roadmap team they need to involve customers at certain steps, or they need to get that feedback and use the feedback to drive action. We have to define how the customer is actually involved in our processes. This even goes back to things like our internal processes. How do we hire people? How do we train people? Make sure that that customer centricity is part of that. If we're not defining that along the way, then we're basically expecting everybody to just get this and sprinkle fairy dust on everything. And that's not how this works. We also want to stay close to the actual customer. There are some really interesting things happening right now around this. The CEOs of Grubhub and Uber and Starbucks all recently announced that they have formal programs to keep their highest level executives in touch with the front line. The CEO of Starbucks has committed to serving with the baristas in stores once a month. That's amazing. And one of the first days, he came back and said, you know what? I'm seeing what's not working. One of the things is that they have all these different size cups and all these different size lids. And he said that takes a lot. And that means that things aren't as fast as they need to be, that customers aren't getting their orders. Employees are frustrated. There's waste because if a cup doesn't fit, but they get that cappuccino foam on it, they have to throw it out. So just by being involved that way, he was able to see, how do we make things better for the customer? The more that we can encourage our executives to do this, not in a performance-based way, not in a, you know what, we've got an executive coming in, we're going to put him in the stock room because we can't trust him to be out there. He doesn't want to be here. Those types of programs are not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is getting executives to understand that this is an opportunity for them to stay customer centric, to make sure that they can bring those ideas back and actually make change. We can't do anything on our own in customer experience. It's a team sport. And part of that is getting that executive sponsorship, that executive buy in, so that we can get the resources and tools and funding and all those things that we need. So, knowing that, let's make sure that we are inviting the executives in, that we have that formal program, that we understand that after that day in the front line or at the contact center or wherever we're connecting them with those customers, that we have an action plan for them as well. And then we also want to make sure if we're really living up to this ideal. If we're only talking about it, but we're not actually evaluating employee performance on customer centric, if we're not making sure that, the processes that we've defined this way and designed this way are actually being followed to include customers, then it really is just talk. Now, there is a lot of interesting data out there right now coming out about a certain mistrust as well between executive level and the frontline level. And this permeates all three of these, because when we think about, when employees are serving customers directly, we have to make sure that we're trusting them with the customer experience ideals. And if we're saying we want to be customer centric, we have to really respect that frontline employee. Culture goes all the way from the top through the entire organization, all the way to your, frontline workers, your contact center, your custodial staff. Every single person impacts the customer experience. And if we're talking about being customer centric, we need to make sure that every single person along the way is empowered with the right tools, the right ideals, the right trust level so that they can really deliver on that. Now, one of the things that has come out recently is that executives feel like some of the labor shortages, some of the economic woes are actually reflective of that level of employee. And what that means is they don't have faith that those employees are going to stick around. They're not investing in them. And so if we have that sort of cynicism at the leadership level, that's not going to serve your frontline employees. That's not going to serve your customers. And there's no way you can be customer centric if that's the attitude. So this is a lot of really understanding what's going on here. So when we talk about the barriers here, we're talking about, leaders don't really understand those frontline roles. Leaders rely on the excuse of business is still business. If you hear excuses like that, push back. I encourage you to say, where would we be without our customers? And did you know that by investing here and making things more customer centric, we can reduce the expenses of service? We can increase the way that customers find us, higher referral rates, higher retention rates, higher customer lifetime value. Talk about the numbers that your leaders care about. And then leaders also think that, we have it on the org chart, so it must be working. This has to be connected to evaluating employee performance. This has to be connected to evaluating departmental performance, product performance, all of those things. It's really not enough to just talk about it. This is a big idea. Culture is big and it takes time to change. So treat this as part of the discipline of customer experience. So lead with confidence and put your words into actions. And as you are considering how to invest in this, use the language that your leaders care about the most. So, how can you put your customer centric culture into action? That's my question for you. And now we're getting to questions. But before we do, I have a couple things that I wanted to share with you. So, get those questions in as we move forward. Um, so the first thing is we have a new assessment for you. And one of the things that this takes into consideration is cultural commitment. There are 4 areas we look at when we talk about our CXI framework. The first is intentional experience, there is cultural commitment, customer collaboration, and experiential innovation. So those are really the formula that we look at for how to create a winning customer experience strategy at your organization. We have a free assessment. You can take it and see. You also get great resources that will help you take that next step. And then we also have our flight school. Our wait list is open. We've had a great response to this. We're really excited about the next steps. This is really a resource to provide guidance for you and coaching along the way using training, resources, guidebooks, workbooks, webinars, all those things, but really to help you create and lead that customer experience at your organization. So with that, I will check in again. Sean, how are we doing? I see we've got some
We do.
folks joining us we've got coast to coast.
We do. We do. We do. We've got Audrey there joining from New York, where it's mid 60s today.
Oh,
She's ready for
fabulous.
some warmer weather. And we got Roby from Metro Park, California. So
Robbie.
we're across, Robbie.
Yep.
Across our great nation. And we also have a couple questions that we got through email.
Excellent.
Yeah. How can we prioritize actions to become more customer centric?
Yeah. And first of all, the reason we got this in email because we have this article on our learning center. So if you want more detail here, please check out that article as well. But prioritization is always such a challenge, right? And when we talk about prioritization within customer experience, it can feel like everything is a priority. And so when we talk about defining what it means to be customer centric, this is what can really help you define what your priorities are. For example, if you say we're just going to respond quickly and efficiently and so friendly to every person who contacts us, that can be really hard to prioritize. Well, does that mean that you want to invest in their experience in store? Does that mean that you have to create, more personalized email campaigns or strategies? All of those things. What we want to do is think about the principles of what it means to be customer centric within our organization, and then think about what are the long term and best ways to invest. Right now, there's a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, as there should be. But, I'm seeing some organizations prioritize the tool before they're thinking about the principle. And what I want you to do is think about the principle first, and then think about where can we invest so that we get long-term results on that principle idea of being customer centric. The other thing to consider here is that we can't change a culture without the employees within. And so if you have no way to really connect the dots for employees, if they have been told about this, but no behaviors, no actions, no discussion about process, then that's where you need to start, because we need to make sure that every employee within the organization actually understands what it means to be customer centric. So start there, understand the principles, and make sure you're guided by those things instead of kind of the shiny thing, which can happen. Good question.
Great question. Great question. We've got another. What advice would you give leaders who need to interact with customers more?
Okay. So this is a good one too. I think right now we're seeing some really great examples from Starbucks and Uber and all of those places that are now coming out and saying, you know what, we need to stay connected. One of the quotes that I've used before, and this is a little older, but I think it still applies, was from the original founder of Groupon, the coupon site. And one of the things that happened with him was he said that basically they became so obsessed with the numbers of data that they lost touch with customers. And he knew that, and he wasn't really, he recognized that before he was kind of unceremoniously asked to leave the company. And so I think that's a good example that sometimes we rely on like spreadsheets and numbers and P&L statements and all these things. And if we're only looking at that side and we're not connecting to the day-to-day lives of customers, their feedback, their actual interactions, then we're going to lose sight of what is most important to them. It really is that simple. So when we think about that example I shared about the Starbucks CEO and what he saw, there are things that actually create more efficiencies within your organization that will create a better customer experience and help you be more customer centric. But you can only see that if you're in there with people, if you're responding, all of those things. A lot of very successful direct to consumer companies spend a lot of their time listening and responding to customers online. So they might be on social media, be very active on social media. They want to know what happens once people receive that product. So they actually, look for those pictures, they look for those user reviews, they interact directly with those customers. And those are the best direct to consumer companies because the leaders are investing in that. So make sure that you're looking at the time of getting to know customers, spending time with customers as an investment that will serve the overall organization. But that is a key part of being customer centric. And I mean, it's just the way businesses are set up, where as we go up the org chart, we get further away from the customer. And that can lead to all sorts of assumptions and all sorts of ways that we might think we're being customer centric, but we're not really. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Uh, Paige has both a platform question and then a metric question. So Paige is in the B2B space,
Mhm.
and they want to implement metrics to help measure how customer-centric the different areas of the organization are. Do you have recommendations of a platform with such capabilities? And then also, secondarily, what type of metrics would you think are most important to consider?
Yeah, good question. So, one of the little cautions I'll share is that metrics are measurements, they aren't goals. So, I always like to start with what are the real business outcomes that you're looking for? And then you kind of peel back the onion from there and say, how can we measure that? So, for example, if you want to make sure that you're delivering an experience that creates word of mouth marketing, maybe you want to create notable experiences, you want to make sure that people are getting what they want. You want to set some outcomes around that specifically. And then you also want to say, okay, how do we know if we're creating those things? Well, that's where you get into feedback metrics. Like you can do this transactionally. So was this something that, made your life better? You can find all sorts of different ways to measure that around net promoter score, customer effort score, customer satisfaction rate, all those things. So you tie those two things together and then you start noticing like what's driving what, and that's what you create for your customer centric score. So I wish I could say, here's the thing off the shelf, but it takes a little bit more nuance. We need to think about how are we driving the business forward and how are we measuring that with customers. Now, feedback metric is one part of that equation. The other part is behavioral. What are customers doing to show us that they feel like they are part of this experience? Are they providing feedback when we ask for it? Are we closing the loop with them so that they feel they, understand that we heard them? Are we doing certain things to move things forward? Because otherwise, what tends to happen is we say, oh, if we're customer centric, then we want our net promoter score to go up every year. Number one, that might not be realistic, frankly. And number two, we want to make sure that it's not just about, what they're telling us, it's about how they're behaving. Are they referring other customers to you? That could be a great way to tell. Are they participating? If you have user events or customer events, are they participating? If you're in the software as a service space, are they actually adopting your software in the way that you want them to? Are they using it the way that you want them to? A lot of softwares get installed, people use it, and then they kind of forget and they stop using it. So look at those usage rates over time. Can you make those go up by being more customer centric? So it's really a little bit of a Venn diagram, right? We have to put all of these pieces together to get to that middle part of, are we really being customer centric? And then the other thing is if you invite them in to tell you, like, how can you co-create? How can you get that feedback in real time from customers? And if you create a metric around that, that's something you can baseline and benchmark year after year after year. So those are a couple of ideas. With the platform, this is a hard question because, again, it depends on your organization. The trick with platforms right now is that we still have a lot of data silos in organizations. We have, marketing has a customer database over here. We have customer service tickets over here. And it's really hard to be customer centric if your data is siloed. So the only thing I will say about platforms specifically, because I tend not to recommend specific platforms just because they all have pros and cons, and it really it's based on your organization and what you're looking for. But what I will say is look for how to connect your data as part of the platform. That is such a key component, and it's still a barrier and a challenge in a lot of organizations. Many of the newer platforms or the updated platforms are looking to connect those things, even if they're not perfect. But you need to think about, if you're using different systems, is it worth it to centralize onto a central platform and kind of start over? Or do you need something that will connect the dots and kind of put the right pipes in place so you can get the right data at the right and the right information at the right time for the right customer? That's really what being customer centric comes down to. And I've seen a lot of organizations who can't do that because of where their data lives and how it's connected. So if you're going to be customer centric, look for those moments of the right data, the right moment for the right customer. And if you can't provide that visibility, then you need to figure out, are there workarounds? Are there things we can do to make sure that we are being as customer centric as possible? That's a big challenge today.
Awesome. And thank you for the question, Paige.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Another question. How can we use storytelling in our customer experience management and be taken seriously for those who want numbers?
Mm. Oh, what a good question. So first of all, they're not mutually exclusive, right? Like we want our numbers to tell a story, and we want to tell a story with our numbers. So I think sometimes we do act like it's quantitative or qualitative, or, we're going to put up the spreadsheet or we're going to tell a customer story. I really believe that we have to weave these things together. We are complex people, all of us. We have the right brain and left brain thing going on. One of my favorite books, I think it's out of print now, but it was called The Leader's Voice. And one of the things that they talked about was how our brains interpret information. And we're always looking for a certain balance between logic and symbolism and emotion, and making sure that we're kind of hitting all three of those things. So when you think about storytelling, you want to think about, okay, if we just report on the numbers, what are we actually trying to say? And once you identify that, then you can pull in things like direct quotes from customers, recordings, showing how customers are not only saying that they love our products and the changes that we made to our customer experience, but they're showing us by visiting our stores more often, by referring their friends or whatever it is, but connecting those dots as well. We have an article I wrote about storytelling. I think we have a video on the YouTube playlist as well. If you go into Experience Investigators and look up storytelling, there are resources there for you. But the idea is, don't just show your data dashboard as numbers. When we talk about data, sometimes we talk about it as if it has to be this hard thing. And I mean, I know some data people get upset when I say this, but anecdotal data is still data. When we have those quotes, when we have those stories, that is still information that we can use. Those are still insights that we can use to improve the customer experience. A lot of data can only be collected over time. And what that means is, if we're waiting for the data, then we're always going to be late. We need to make sure that we're looking at all the opportunities for data, all the opportunities to listen to customers and turn that into a story that will drive action. So they're not mutually exclusive. They are very connected. And our job is to connect those things so that leaders have the buy-in and help us move forward on behalf of the customer in order to get those results for the organization. Great question.
Yeah, great question.
Oh, and
Uh,
Kia's already put it in the chat. So if you're looking for the link, the article and video for how storytelling can superpower CX is what it's called. The link is in the chat there. So feel free to check that out.
Not surprised that he was.
Thank you, Kia.
Another great question from Paige. They've got the CX program running for 2 years, in the past 2 years, and having trouble with buy-in and support, even though it's part of the company's objectives.
Mhm.
How can we get internal stakeholders to really buy in and understand the importance of this customer-centric aspect and become that it's the key part? It's not
Mhm.
just was the customer and customer experience team
Mhm.
responsibility.
Oof. Okay, here we go. So, yes, this is the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity for customer experience leaders, is to get buy-in from other leaders. We've also written and had some videos about this too, so I encourage you to look that up. But essentially, we need to start talking like business people. And what I mean by that is, can you imagine a scenario where the sales team is told, you're responsible for sales, all sales, no matter what? You are, here's your quota. And after a quarter, if they maybe didn't meet that exactly, can you imagine a CEO going, well, I guess sales doesn't work? Huh. Well, we tried it. We tried it. It doesn't work. It doesn't move the business forward. So we're just going to stop selling. Nobody would ever say that. But that happens to customer experience teams. And it's because after a while, things like Net Promoter Score can seem very uh, seductive in the beginning, frankly. We go, oh, we're going to find out this really compelling question of, would you recommend us? Why or why not? We're going to find out. We're going to put a number to it. It's going to be great. But Net Promoter Score is not something that changes overnight. And there are certain industries where there's not a lot of room, right? We can do our best, but people, there's only so much we can do. So if we are relying on just feedback metrics like that to justify these programs, then we're missing the opportunity to actually tie it to what we do for business. Because what happens is people see that net promoter score time and again, and they think that's the only thing that the customer experience team is doing. They're responsible for the net promoter score, even though they have no accountability over the actual changes that need to be made. So it's this weird vortex that happens where customer experience people get kind of sucked into the measurement of it, and they're told that the metrics are the goal. The metrics are a measurement. What we want to do is define what is the goal we're actually trying to do. I All of you have heard me say this. I say this on almost every one of these sessions. I always start with the CX mission. And the reason is if you have that customer experience mission statement, that gives everybody alignment over who are we to our customers? What is the promise we've made? And who are we no matter what? And there we go. We've got the workbook for you already. So we have resources for you as well. But the whole point of that is that you get leaders to buy into this and understand that, you know what, in order to do this, in order to show up the same way, we need every single organizational leader to be accountable for different parts of this. You cannot move forward saying that you're customer centric if your product team literally does not believe it's their job, that they think that it's the customer experience team's job to do that. We have to get over this metrics thing. We have to break free of it because in too many organizations, customer experience leaders are told that the metrics are their responsibility and the metrics are the goal. And yet, those same people have no accountability, authority, or influence even into some of the ways that impact that. So you need to understand the customer journey, you need to have that customer experience mission, and then you have to define your goals differently. And this is where we use something called the CX success statement, where you outline what are the organizational goals? What do our leaders care about? Your chief financial officer cares about very different things than your chief marketing officer. Now, is there overlap? Of course, everybody wants to be successful. But what I'm saying is we need to use the language of our leaders to tie back to why are we investing in this? Otherwise, it becomes this very amorphous thing. There we go. We've got more resources for you, the success statement there. So once you define things in the organizational outcome way, that allows you to have the authority to say, you know what, we are trying to achieve this. We can only go so far, right? If you are not going to invest in the right platforms so that we can access data at the right times, here's why that won't help us meet our goal. Here's what that is reflected in the measurements, in the feedback that we get from customers. We have to define this as a strategy and then use discipline, business discipline to back it up. That's how we get buy-in. Now, I've also seen different things where because this is kind of retrofitting culture sometimes, right? If this hasn't been your culture and you're that CX change agent who we love, right? You're in there, you're trying to make things happen. One of the things you can do is start really evaluating who's an ambassador and who's not. And one of the ways you can do this is with your own little CX strategy to get those leaders on board. I've seen leaders who use NPS for the various leaders in their organization. And sometimes they do this internally. They say, would this person recommend having a CX program? Yes or no? No. As of today, no. Okay, that's who I need to focus on and get them involved. Involve them by getting them involved with customer journey mapping, by sharing those customer stories, by making sure that the internal communication is strong enough so they understand the outcomes that happen because of investment in the customer experience and the pain points that happen when you don't. So it's this. I mean, this is why I think customer experience leaders are amazing because you're all out there doing things that, basically are everybody's role in a way. You are measuring, you are designing, you are projecting, you are getting everybody on board. But once the change happens, then what happens is you start getting those same leaders who didn't buy into this. They start coming to CX leaders saying, I have this idea. I noticed that customers were saying this. I think we should work on this. Will you help me with that? Will you help me design the journey? Will you help me get customers involved? Will you help me design a feedback metric so that we can figure out if we're doing this or not? That's when you know that you've really turned them into ambassadors, but they have to see that as something that will help them be successful in their role. And that's why we use in the success statement, what do leaders care about? You have to include that too. This is a big topic, and you can tell that it's something we're really passionate about because this is what makes real change in organizations. But if you're that CX change agent out there, I just want to say keep going. It can be very frustrating, but every single CX program in the world started with one change agent. And if that's you, you are doing the right thing. Keep banging that drum and define things as a business person first, and that will get your other leaders involved. Woo!
Awesome.
All right, I
Yeah,
need some water.
that was that question from Paige was a great one. Both got an emotional response, so fantastic. And that's the end of our Ask Me Anything segment. Some great questions today, though. Really good stuff.
I agree. So many great questions. As always, it's always so fun. And I saw we have folks who joined us from Jordan as well
Yeah,
as North America. And that's always fun too, because this is a universal global topic. And everybody in the world who has a business has customers. And sometimes even that business is a nonprofit organization or an academic institution or whatever. But it's so great that we can all connect this way. And I know that the leaders who join us here have that in their heart to do the best thing for customers, and that's so cool as well. So thank you
absolutely.
all for being here. And I want to emphasize again that we've opened the wait list for our CXI Flight School.
Mhm.
So that is something that if you haven't signed up for, let's bring up the QR code.
Yeah,
And
I'll jump out.
okay,
See
thanks,
you, everyone.
Sean. So we are uh, right now today, we've opened up the wait list. We'll have some more announcements for you soon. If you want those announcements, make sure you join us there, because that will be where we start releasing the application and things like that. We're really excited about this program. It's something that we designed based on feedback from different people here, from different leaders that we've worked with. We know that most CX leaders are overwhelmed, overworked, and under resourced. And what we're trying to do is fill the gap for you and give you what you need to really succeed as a leader. The other thing, don't forget, we've got a podcast. We're having a ton of fun with this too. You have such great questions here. Please feel free, leave me a voicemail. I love hearing from you. We answer one question in every episode. So they're short episodes, one question, one answer. We've had all sorts of fascinating topics, including things like, what do I do about imposter syndrome as a CX leader? Or how do we make sure that we are connecting the employee experience to the customer experience? So all sorts of things. If you haven't checked it out, find it wherever you listen to podcasts, and then check out that link at speakpipe.com/experience action to actually leave a voicemail. Please leave me voicemails. We love hearing from you. And so last thing I want to say is just thank you for being here. LinkedIn Learning courses, there's a new one coming out. So if you're curious about that, please check that out. It's about CX Foundation, so that will be available to you. We have the podcast, we've got all the resources, but really this is all about me living my mission with you. Now, if you haven't heard me say it in the past, my mission is to create fewer ruined days for customers. And so, you being here with us today, this is about empowering you to live that mission. And so, you're helping me live that as well. So, thank you so much, as always, for being here. Our next live session will be June 23rd. As Sean mentioned, I'm traveling a lot these days. So, we're getting them in as we can, but it's something I love doing with you, and I hope you enjoy this time together as well. Thank you so much for all you're doing. Go have a great weekend, and we'll see you on June 23rd.